Hello and welcome. Today we've got Brad Olsen, an award-winning author, and we are going to be discussing UFOs and extraterrestrials. Now, just before we begin, you can subscribe to our Telegram channels and to nicholasveniamin.com for my free email updates. And if you're watching this for the first time on YouTube, I will leave the link below in the description for the full interview, unless, of course, myself and Brad can choose our words wisely due to the insane censorship that's happening right now. Brad, thank you for joining me. How are you and what have you been up to?
Hey there, Nicholas. It's really great to have this opportunity to talk to you. I've been working on new projects. I've been getting outdoors as much as I can and trying to just keep my mood up in these very trying times.
Absolutely. Aren't we all? And it's very challenging, of course. Now, I hear that you have had experience and you've seen, UFOs and extraterrestrials, and you're also an award-winning author, and you have so much knowledge that you would like to share with the viewers concerning this matter. Why don't you give us a short presentation of your knowledge of this area, extraterrestrials and UFOs, and what you've experienced, how you came across it, and why you feel people need to know about this and what's important about this. And then we can go ahead with some questions and answers.
Well, isn't it interesting that Hollywood has also been very interested in this subject, and we've heard so much about it in culture and media for a very long time. Myself notwithstanding, I've had a very keen interest in this subject from the time I was very young. Used to draw pictures of aliens and UFOs and things when I was illustrating. But more importantly, it was as an adult, having some visual experiences, seeing very inexplicable objects in the sky, and not really having any way to verify or understand what I had seen. And so it was really a course of working on my books in the Esoteric Series, especially the second book called Future Esoteric, in which the foreword of the book, I describe this moment in 1997 when myself and several others witnessed a very bright streaking light in the sky at Crater Lake in southern Utah that was heading directly into the lake. We fell down laughing. We couldn't believe what we saw. It was perfectly quiet and lasted for almost a minute. We ran up to see if our friends had seen it, and just a couple minutes later had the exact same experience, seeing this white streaking light into Mount Shasta, about 70 miles distant in the south. So it was like a 2-for-1 in one day. And ever since that experience, Nicholas, I've really just tried to get to the bottom of what's going on here. And as we look into the exopolitical situation, which really just means the politics beyond this earth, why they would be coming here, what our interaction would be, and how we would deal with that kind of information or that technology that might be indeed backward engineered and leading to many of the big breakthroughs that we have seen in the last century, and could be coming up into what could be described as our Star Trek future. But as we know, we're not being given this kind of information. And indeed, I do believe that our Star Trek future is not only happening in the secret space program and a breakaway civilization, but has been robbed from the rest of us, that we just don't have this information to base good findings on. So therefore, it falls on the shoulders of independent researchers who want to get to the bottom of this, because Hollywood, while projecting an interesting story for the rest of us, doesn't quite give us all the factual information we need to make very knowledgeable decisions on this subject.
Right. So have you, are you aware that there are different types of extraterrestrials as well, and good ones and bad ones? And what can you tell us about that?
That's a great question, Nicholas. And indeed, I do believe that we live not only in a world of duality, but a universe of duality, that there are good ones and bad ones. And you know how we've always been programmed to look to the skies and say, oh, the extraterrestrial outside this planet are coming down here to Earth. Well, what about right below our feet? What about the inner terrestrials that may have been here all along? And thirdly, what about the ultra terrestrials, those that may have interdimensional abilities to phase in and out of the reality when we can see them? So these are all very important factors to consider when discussing anything extraterrestrial or interterrestrial. And so interterrestrials may have gotten around the whole notion of the prime directive, that principle that was developed in the Star Trek series, that any developing civilization such as ours needs to be left alone, uninterfered with. But if those interterrestrials are of this planet as well, maybe that's the workaround. Maybe that's how perhaps grays and reptilian creatures may have lived here all along and have very old, I call them legacy bases at several locations around the world. The one that's most famous here in North America is in Dulce, New Mexico, which goes down 10 levels and has quite a few frightening things in the bottom, because they are working on genetic experiments, including those of abducted humans and so many other things. And Dulce, New Mexico is not too far away from the San Luis Valley, which also extends between Colorado and New Mexico. And that is where the very first animal mutilations took place. I say animal because the very first mutilation was actually a horse named Snippy the horse, right by the Great Sand Dunes in the San Luis Valley of Colorado. And then we've heard of multiple accounts of cattle mutilations occurring after that.
So what gives suspicion to a researcher, an independent researcher, that there are grays or other foreign entities in our inside of our planet?
Well, the abduction phenomenon, for one, all these very inexplicable animal mutilations where you could have a 1,600-pound bull that just is found with no foot tracks around in the snow, and much of the soft tissue extracted with laser-like precision, including the extraction of red blood cells. This has been going on for decades, Nicholas, and I happen to know several of the leading researchers in cattle mutilations, including Linda Moulton Howe and others who have gone out to many of these mutilation sites, Christopher O'Brien, and they are just as confused as I am as to the origin of these mutilations and who and what might be behind it. But I think we can speculate and say that there is something of, and well, maybe not extraterrestrial, but an interterrestrial origin that is doing these things to these animals, as well as abducting humans. And there are not just hundreds or thousands of people who have claimed to have been abducted, but getting close to 1 million worldwide people who have abduction memories. And when they regress their memory, because oftentimes they're swiped of their memory, and you could look back at the Barney and Betty Hill example, one of the very first abductees to come forward, them saying that their memory was swiped and they had to go to hypnotherapy to regain those memories. And then what they remembered was them being operated on, and oftentimes in a very uncomfortable or unusual way, but then being brought back to the location where they were taken and then going about their way, but always feeling that something wasn't quite right with the whole experience.
And why are they so fascinated and obsessed of DNA experiments? Why is DNA the key for them? What exactly are they searching for? What's the bottom line for them?
Well, Earth is a giant receptacle of many different species and DNA that would be here. It's my understanding that some extraterrestrials that will come here are not interested in the human race at all. They're just coming to collect a beetle in the rainforest, and that's what they find interesting. But for the human race, now there's close to 8 billion of us. Well, gosh, we would be quite a receptacle of human DNA that could be of very great interest to other species that are very similar to us or could use it in certain kind of ways. In fact, the very first gray aliens that interacted with the US military were often saying that they were of a dying race, that they needed the human DNA to interfuse with their own to create hybrid species just to keep their species alive. So you can see that if a species were on the brink of extinction, because in the case of gray aliens, they do not use natural birth as we know it, with a male and female, and reproductive organs have atrophied. So they are actually all test tube babies. They're all coming out of a laboratory, and that breaks down the DNA of a species. So to infuse it with fresh, natural human DNA might be what they needed to keep their own species going. Now, this would have been very frightening to the early military people who were taking down craft from the time of Roswell, and another one called the Aztec crash in Aztec, New Mexico, that just happened a couple years after Roswell. And what they found in the craft was very frightening. And this is why there has been such a lid on any kind of disclosure of UFOs in our airspace. Not only can they interrupt our normally protected airspace over the US, but in the case of Aztec, according to Bill Cooper, who was Navy intelligence, what they found in Aztec were human body parts. And this just really put the kibosh on any kind of attempt at disclosure. Now, what's going on now, Nicholas, is there is a drip, 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 slowly turning into a steady flow of UFO disclosure. We've seen that with the Navy declassifying the Tic Tac video and other mentions of it. So for the very first time, it is getting some kind of advocacy through the government that this is a real phenomenon.
Absolutely. People's minds are definitely opening much more. And, more information is being dripped out there and people are becoming more open-minded. Now, you said that these aliens, they are made in a tube. They cannot breathe in the same form or way that we can. So I understand that the technology that they're using could be similar to the cloning centers that they have in some of like Clone. So how did they begin to breed in the first place? And when they are making these bodies or producing these bodies into tubes, whose consciousness are they moving into these bodies, do you think?
It's often said that many of these clones or the gray species themselves have no soul. That one thing that they give up on when they do move over to synthetic beings is that the soul does not attach in the same way it does with a human birth. Now, remember about 30 years ago, we had Dolly the sheep that was cloned in a laboratory. This technology is not only decades old, but could very well be applied to humans as well. So it should come as no surprise to your listeners that cloning technology is very much real. And you mentioned the cloning laboratories here on Earth, and very much are a product of our weird science, so to speak, and is very much a real science to begin with. So shouldn't come as much of a surprise to say that perhaps humans have been cloned. But in the case of aliens and how they're doing it, well, you can have clone species, for example, and it being very human-like, but not quite human. And the big difference is it would not retain the souls. So we've heard about the black-eyed children. And interestingly, if you look at the physiology of gray aliens, they too have black eyes. No white in their eyes, just a black sheen. So it suggests to me that those black-eyed children and the men in black, who are highly telepathic and can communicate mind to mind, are these ET human hybrid clones.
Right. So why do you think they make them so ugly, these aliens? Why can't they make them more like humans?
Maybe they think we're ugly. I don't know.
Maybe so. So do you know much about the real society? Because I have a few questions for that. If you know anything about, if you could tell us what you know about the real society.
Sure. And I do cover that in my new book, Beyond Esoteric, Escaping Prison Planet. We're going to save that to the end, but just that I do write about it. And I am very interested in everything about Germany post-World War I. Okay, so this is in the 1920s, and you have these highly telepathic human women, Maria Orsic and Sigrill are two that grew their hair very, very long. They felt that helped them with their telepathic ability. And they were in a meeting in a Bavarian hunting lodge. And I've actually been there. It's near Berchtesgaden in southern Germany, in Bavaria, the area where they were working. And they were telepathically communicating with the Aldebaran, very advanced, very human-like. In fact, you wouldn't even be able to distinguish an Aldebaran human-like ET if it walked by you on the street. Maybe their eyes are bigger if you looked at their eyes, and perhaps their head a little bit bigger than ours. But if you could disguise it with sunglasses or a hat, they could integrate right here on Earth. But they were telepathically passing on blueprints of free energy devices, 0-point energy craft that the real society was able to use into mapping out this information. And it should come as no surprise that Adolf Hitler and Himmler and Hess and several others were part of the Thule Society, which was another secret society in post-World War I Germany. It should come as no surprise that they quickly usurped the Vril Society into the Thule Society for that very reason, to then use those blueprints in the Third Reich. And let's face it, at the end of World War II, the Allies were very frightened about any kind of technology that the Germans had, and for good reason, because they did. And they had backward engineered quite a few craft, not only their own from a crash in the Black Forest in the 1930s, but Mussolini in Italy had obtained a nearly intact craft that he turned over to the German scientists. And so a lot of this technology was worked on in a location called the Skoda Works in what is today the Czech Republic. By the time the Russians, who were the first to get to that at the end of World War II, they found no craft, although there are pictures and blueprints of that craft being developed in the Third Reich. A lot of that went down to Antarctica, to the base 211, and also to several locations in South America, which 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to travel down to both South America, to some of these locations, as well as Antarctica, in search of many of these great mysteries, Nicholas. And I'll tell you, that is an onion whose layer continues to get peeled open, and the mystery only gets greater the deeper you go.
So let me get this right. So there were ETs that would have this telepathic technology where they would telepathically put or install in humans without them probably knowing, or maybe subconsciously. And it would allow for the Vrils to use them to like tracking devices. They'll be able to track them down. Okay. But instead of a chip, it was a telepathic technology, right?
Right.
You see these Vrils. What is the connection between, if you could describe to us what a Vril is, and what is the connection of a Vril to an ET, and how the Vrils got here?
Well, Vril had actually several meanings to the Germans in 1920. Not only was it the Vril Society, VRIL is the way it's spelled, but they also developed a line of craft, the Vril craft, based on this technology. But Vril was actually the techno-cosmic energy source that they were able to tap into, this 0-point energy that could fuel a craft, not using fuel as we know it, like petroleum products or anything else, but from the fabric of space itself, we're able to draw this energy source to fly these craft. So it was very revolutionary at the time. And to think this was 100 years ago, Nicholas, that they were tapping into this and coming up with these blueprints that the very talented engineers were able to start to backward engineer and use in some of these super weapons that so greatly frightened the Allied troops coming in. It's been said that had Germany been able to delay the end of the war another 6 months to a year, they may have had the technology to repel the advancing Allied forces and the Russians. There were craft seen not in a combat situation, but just as a scout craft, disc-shaped craft over the Battle of Kursk, which was the biggest tank battle in history outside of Moscow in 1943, as well as other photos and blueprints that have emerged, and some of which I include in my Esoteric series of books.
So what do these Vrils look like? Are you saying they're not physical?
So I'm saying Vril is actually a description of the energy source that they were tapping into. The Vril Society were very much Earth women who were very telepathic, who were working through their telepathic ability with the Aldebaran, very advanced ETs. Germany in the 1920s was a peaceful place. They were very advanced. And I believe that the Aldebaran saw them as being the best receptacles to deliver some of this technology so that it would advance the human race. Unfortunately, it was usurped by darker forces who then used it for more nefarious reasons. But I don't think Vril was actually a species, but just a used description of this techno-magical energy that they were tapping into.
So I thought that a Vril was a species that lived, way beneath the earth. They're apparently indigenous, distinct from dinosaurs, way before, ancient Egypt. And that, they would use parts of their body to get into the person's eye, to move their consciousness in there, through that way. And that's where, and there was a link there as well with historical meaning, symbolic, with the Eye of Horus. What do you think about that?
Well, as I said, there were many meanings of Vril. In the context of the Vril Society, as I described, was how I understand it. But you go deep down the rabbit hole, Nicholas, and yes, there is the Vril, little reptilian kind of creature. So all those figures that we have seen, mostly of the elite craft that have the black eye, well, that is the entry point of these little Vril lizards, as I understand it, that they can get into the body and then usurp the mind of the person and make them one of them. So this is a very dark and deep subject, but you have to think, how did all these very wealthy and very well-connected people get these black eyes? And the common theme is that they were part of this real initiation with these little creatures.
How far down the rabbit hole are you willing to get with me on this interview?
Let's go, Nicholas. As deep as you want, mate.
Okay. So these species, okay, how did they get here?
Well, again, they may be interterrestrial, meaning they could have been here all along. And therefore, when they interact with the human race or with the elite, they're not really breaking the prime directive laws. Because if they are already born here, then they have a right to exist, to do what they do. And in this case, if there are people who, in their free will, are willing to accept these things, then that's their choice. And we just have to be here to try to understand and make sense of that.
Absolutely. Well, there are many Hollywood people who are victims of this procedure, and there are many people that do speak out as well that are aware of this, but in plain sight and in subliminal messages, and they're doing all they can to tell people the truth and to expose this, but it's very difficult for them. So can you give me your opinion on who you think out there right now may have been a victim, body snatched by a vril and taken over, and their souls, gone?
Right. Well, just about everybody we've seen with the black eye, it's probably as a result of that. How do high-ranking senators like Harry Reid or Prince Philip get a black eye? I don't see anybody punching them. You can't get close enough to do that. Not to say that every single one of them was of real attachment, but this kind of goes into the whole concept of people's souls being robbed from them. And it also ties into the whole idea of cloning. How is it that some cannot have souls attached? Now, this goes into reincarnation and who we really are as people here on this planet. But in the case of these little vril lizards, and I've seen pictures of them, they're not big. They're only about the size of a silver dollar or so. And that is their preferred entry point into the body. And look, right through the eye, that's a pretty quick way to get to the brain. If there is that connection, if they are physically hijacking the brain, well, that could be it. So your question is, who may be affected by these things? Well, we've seen them in Hollywood, celebrities, and many politicians here in the US and worldwide, as well as royal family members. Look, these are the big people in the world today who are shaping perceptions. And I've often said that the war right now is all about controlling the narrative. And if they need to control the narrative with these top figures, royal family, politicians, and celebrities, well, I would think that these vril lizards would be a pretty good way of controlling those people to control the narrative.
Could you please describe the vril's characteristics?
So I've seen just pictures of them. I've not seen them personally, but they do kind of look like little reptiles that are very ferocious when it comes to getting involved in the person who they are then being a part of. And another interesting thing is when these people get their black eyes, they're almost proud of it. They're almost showing it off for whatever reason. Maybe it is because they have been taken over and they're saying, hidden in plain sight, just, hey, here it is. This is who I am now. And if you know it, you know it. If you don't, hey, there's another person with a black eye. How did that happen? So best I could describe them as just tiny little lizards, about the size of a silver dollar, like I said. And that's kind of what they are.
I mean, I heard there was so much bigger, but I could be wrong. Now, I've seen the black eye as well, but you know what confuses me? I've seen Prince Philip with the black eye, but when he was much older, recently.
Yeah.
I would imagine that they would have this black eye and being taken over when they were, before they were wealthy. That's why they're wealthy today, so they can control.
That's an interesting question. Or maybe Queen Elizabeth got in a fight with him and punched him in the eye. But the common denominator, the data points that I've heard, as far as the elite having these black eyes, is that it had something to do with this real takeover. And why it happened later in life with someone like Philip, who actually had it all and was very wealthy at the time, I can't explain that, other to say that maybe it was against his will, perhaps. And that after he got it, he's a different kind of person.
So can you please explain the personality traits that a real would have? For an example, in my opinion, would be that they have no empathy.
That's right. And wouldn't that be controlling the narrative? Wouldn't that be someone who could then get in front of the cameras and tell the people of his country to do things a certain way? Perhaps before that happened, they were a little reluctant and maybe they didn't want to. So they were then subjected to this real attachment.
Would you suspect that Jeffrey Epstein was a body snatched and a real because of what he was doing with the island and torturing children and raping children and doing things like that?
Well, he was never really repentant, and I don't recall ever seeing him with the black eye. So I don't know. Maybe some get it, some don't. Maybe he. I can't.
No, of course. That. Okay, no worries. So the reals and the ETs, the extra ETs, the extraterrestrials, are they working together?
Well, they would be with the malevolent side of ETs. So as I said in the beginning, we live in a duality. Not only on this planet, we see stark duality all around us, good and bad. So many things that make you wonder who's really running the show here on this planet. To even in the cosmos, there are wars with these reptilian forces who actually act kind of like a locust invasion. When they see a vulnerability, they'll move in, and then they will become interterrestrials, therefore able to go beyond the laws of the prime directive on the developing planets they're on, such as here on Earth. So Absolutely. there is good and bad even in the universe. And you'd like to think, if they're with the technology to come here with some kind of craft that we're still trying to figure out how they did it through a wormhole or whatever, wouldn't they all be good? Not necessarily so. And that can be indicative of what these grays, who are really part of the larger archonic network. And the archons have been identified from long, long ago. Carlos Castaneda wrote about them, to the jinn in Islamic culture. They are also these interdimensionals that will feed off of our fear. And they even have a word for it called loosh, that they really love it when we're turbulated, when we're angry, when we're upset, and they get a food source from that. But the top of that food chain of this archonic network are the reptilians. And they have been here for thousands of years. They do live underground for the most part. They'll come up, they've been seen, they've been photographed. But the grays are kind of their servants, and they are test tube products also created here on this planet, right in the Dulce base. So you kind of get an idea for how this power structure works in this ultra terrestrial realm. And both the grays and the reptilians are known to phase in and out of our reality. So, for example, what if we were at some kind of Illuminati ceremony, almost like the Eyes Wide Shut movie, and you and I are kind of in the background being like, what is this? We're at this ceremony, we're wearing a mask or a robe, whatever, and they are calling in these entities, and something were to appear. into our reality. We'd see it with our own eyes, Nicholas. Don't you think you'd come away from that as a believer that there is something that's being done here? And perhaps this is what they're up to, bringing people into the fold.
Absolutely. That's why we can't tell them. We have to show them.
That's right.
You know, so let's go. Let's talk about a bit more about what you have in your book other than extraterrestrials. I know you've got a very interesting book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what other things you cover in there that's interesting?
Sure. Well, the book is called Beyond Esoteric, Escaping Prison Planet. So knowing these things will help you understand the world we live in today, all the subjects that have been withheld from us, because all that is hidden will be revealed. And I have been very passionate about this subject for many years, just collecting this information, just trying to make sense of it all, and having the opportunity to put that into book form. So there is a section in Beyond Esoteric called Embargo, meaning the truth embargo that has been withheld from us regarding all things extraterrestrial, but also the elongated skulls and the giants that have been found in the fossil record, and make sense of a lot of things like these megalithic sites around the world that we still can't build with modern machinery. But it starts out in the neo-fascist section, showing how this global elite, probably with support of this archonic and malevolent ET network, has controlled this planet for a long time. That's the prison planet we find ourselves in now. But what I want people to understand is we can change that. We can escape prison planet and make this a prism planet. That was our good friend Tracy Jaco came up with that solution. And I like that a lot, that we can do things to ourselves to make ourselves better. And this is the final section in Beyond Esoteric called Ubermind, how we can then become advanced in our own way to have this cosmic connection with the universe of getting our energy systems to work in a way that we haven't been taught in school. How wonderful would it have been, Nicholas, if when we were in kindergarten, we started to learn about the energy chakras in our body? What about in first grade, we started to communicate telepathically, and by second grade, we were already bending spoons with telekinesis? So there's so many of these hidden potential within humanity that has been withheld from us, that I just want people to be made aware that this is possible. And with that information, people can make their own decisions how they want to use it.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, Brad, I would love to put your link in the show, in the link below, so that people can purchase your book. They can have a look at it. They can read it. And also, if you wish, I could put your contacts where people can contact you as well if they'd like to ask you questions. But it's been an absolute honor to have you, Brad. And is there anything else that you'd like to say to the viewers before we finish?
Well, just try to stay positive in this great period of change. I think we were all brought here at this particular time, and perhaps voluntarily, to be a part of the Great Awakening. And it's a great honor to speak with you, Nicholas. I know you're a part of the solution, and be part of the solution, not part of the problem. But it all starts from within. Know thyself and gain as much knowledge and wisdom as you can, because we need that in these very trying times.
Absolutely. Brad Olsen, it's been an absolute honor. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.